Welcome back to our second session of our online UK Stroke Club Conference 2020. And a warm welcome to those of you who haven't been before. There's an incredible 40% of people joining who haven't been to one of our club conference sessions, so welcome. I hope you are all suitably refreshed after hearing from our CEO, Juliette Bouverie, and Stephen Jacks from the North Birmingham Stroke Support Group this morning, who talked about responding to COVID-19. If you missed it, don't worry, it will be on our website in the next few days. And if you have any questions or other reflections following that session or any other sessions today, please do email us on stroke conference, club conference at stroke.org.uk. So we'd also love to see pictures of you joining in at home. If you like to go on social media, please do post your photos or share your thoughts using the hashtag UKSCC. Right, we will get on with our next webinar. We know it is an issue that's close to all of your hearts. When can we meet again as a group? I want to welcome Nic Mooney, our volunteering and training development officer, and Neil Jarman. He works in our health, safety and wellbeing team, and they're going to talk through our current position based on the government guidance and how we want to proceed moving forward. Over to you both.
Thanks, Beth, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we get started with the main bulk of the presentation, I'm just going to talk very briefly about the difference between a club and a group, because that's really important for what we're talking about here. So if we go on to our first slide, please. So start firstly with what is a stroke association group. A stroke association group is a group that is part of the Stroke Association. So it's run by Stroke Association volunteers and is part of, it comes under our constitution and must follow our policies and procedures. But then if we go on to the next slide, we'll see the difference from an independent club is that a club is a separate organisation, charity or community group. Could be quite small, it could be quite big. Clubs come in all shapes and sizes. It'll have its own constitution, its own policies and procedures, though it could be affiliated to the Stroke Association. So as we talk through today, we'll be using that language, Stroke Association group for groups that are part of the Stroke Association, and independent club for those who are independent. And the important thing in this context is that clubs can make their own choices and set their own policies and procedures in response to COVID-19, but will absolutely share our resources and our positions to help you. Whereas Stroke Association groups, you're part of the Stroke Association, you get more in-depth support from us, and you have to follow our policies and positions. So I'll hand you over to Neil now, who is going to talk about what the government guidance says.
Thank you, Nick, and hello to everyone out there who can see and hear me. So the government guidance has changed quite a lot in the last few weeks, and I'm sure people would have obviously seen that on the news. This is a lot of work, so our frequently asked questions document hasn't been quite updated, but this is something we are working on and should be available this week for people to see. We're going to have a look at the different government guidance that is out there. Now, we obviously cover all 4 nations within the United Kingdom, and each one of those nations has slightly different guidance and rules. So we've been looking at what they are, and then essentially utilizing that guidance to come up with our own sort of rules and procedures around getting groups back up and running in the longer term future. So most of the advice that you see out there is for the general public. So the advice that you see on the news. But if you dig a bit deeper and do a bit of research, there are various caveats and exceptions that can be made to the rules that are out there. So starting with England, groups of up to 15 people can meet. So there is a caveat to the guidance of the rule of 6 that support groups can meet, and support groups means all sorts of things. I'm not going to list them all off, but one of those is people with long-term illness. So that is obviously people with stroke. So stroke groups are exempt from the rule of 6. So where there are more than 15 people who may be looking to meet in your group environment moving forward, a rota system will need to be used. Now, based on the guidance that is out there, it is 15 people. So that is where the line is drawn. So if you say you've got 16 people, then perhaps 2 groups of 8 might be the way forward. Wales is a little bit different. So people should not meet indoors in groups of more than 6. Again, there is some exceptions to that. If a carer is required, they are not included within the figures. But groups can meet outdoors, and outdoor gatherings no longer need to be organised by a business or public body. So that is something that that we can do ourselves. Now, in terms of the maximum numbers that can meet outdoors at a group in Wales, that would essentially go down to conducting a risk assessment and establishing what is a safe number of people. What our position is, despite potentially having 6 people in a group venue, based on the guidance, us as an organisation are basically saying that groups cannot be held indoors of more than 6 people. So it is different to England. Hopefully that makes sense. Moving on to Scotland. No groups will be allowed to run based on the current guidance. It is as simple as that for Scotland. I know that's not ideal, but at least it is quite clear. Only 6 people can meet from 2 households. So with that information, that is not conducive for us to running life after stroke support clubs and groups. And final nation within our United Kingdom, Northern Ireland. So gatherings of 15 people are allowed, except in private dwellings, which of course wouldn't affect our clubs and groups. Where there are more than 15 people, a rota system will need to be used. So for the purposes of this, Northern Ireland and England are the same. Interestingly, Northern Ireland has actually had this guidance in longer than the rule of 6 in the rest of the United Kingdom. It is all very confusing. We appreciate that. But hopefully we've made sense of it in those 4 nations.
Thanks, Neil. So that was the government guidance, and that is what it says as it changed in the last week or so. But those of you who joined us earlier will have heard Juliet talk about the fact that we don't plan to resume our groups until 2021 now. We had previously said that we'd look at resuming groups from October at the earliest, and what we're saying now is actually this year is not going to be possible. You know, with the guidance changing, that reflects increased risk in the community. So we'll be looking at it in January. We'll decide then if we can resume groups, or it might be we decide to wait a little bit longer. But what we can say for now is that we'll not be resuming our groups until 2021. And I know that might be disappointing to some people, but I also know that some group volunteers don't want to meet over the winter anyway. So I know there might be some mixed reactions to that decision, but we're also really confident that it is the right decision, because coronavirus is increasingly a risk to us out in the community, and lots of group members and lots of volunteers too are actually at higher risk of complications if they do catch coronavirus. But we also are really acutely aware that there's some people who are really isolated, you know, the people who can't engage with the remote activity that you've been doing, so people who can't get online and people who struggle to use the phone. So we're going to put a real focus on working together to see how we can reach those people and provide a bit more support for them during this hard time. But we're also going to continue preparing for when we can resume groups. So we've been developing guidance, training, a risk assessment template, putting the tools in place that you'll need to be able to resume groups when the time is right. And we've had some really great involvement from volunteers from clubs and groups, and I know some of you are here today, so thank you very much for the contributions that you've made to helping us develop our guidance. It's been really valuable. And we're going to continue this work by undertaking a very limited number of trials. So before 2021, we're going to do a couple of tests, working with clubs and groups to make sure that what we're recommending, our guidance and our procedures do actually work in practice, so that when we can resume groups, we're well prepared for it and we can do it more quickly when the time is right. And a lot of the volunteers who have been giving us feedback on those guidance documents and those tools have noted that, you know, resuming groups is going to be a lot of work. And I think that absolutely is the case, that, you know, there's going to be a lot involved in that. And Neil's going to talk us through some of that in a minute. But when we do resume our stroke association groups, we're going to be taking a phased approach. And that means we can support you better. So if we sort of don't do all of our over 200 groups at once, we'll be able to provide more support to stroke association groups as you do return. So when we look at returning groups, we'll be starting with those who have members who are most isolated and least able to connect remotely. So that's our position for stroke association groups. For independent clubs, it is of course your decision, but we would be advising you to be not meeting until 2021 and to review in January as well. We won't be able to support you as extensively as we support our own groups when we do resume groups, but we'll absolutely make our resources, our risk assessment template, our guidance, our training and our drop-ins available to you, so we can support you as much as we can as well. But I'll pass you back to Neil now, who's going to talk us through what resuming groups might look like.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. So as Nick has just explained, we're not going to be starting groups until next year. And we'll obviously let you know when that is. Clubs, of course, can make their own decision in the meantime. But for clubs, our primary advice would be not to meet as a group at this stage. Cases are rising. Although if you look at the figures of the last 2 days, they have gone down, but certainly the last 7-day average, the cases have been going up. That might be the weekend factor, as it was on the first wave. And the government scientific advisors have basically said that expect to see cases continue to rise. And we must remember that group members and, of course, many volunteers are largely people at high risk of complications, obviously, if they do contract coronavirus. So the decision is for clubs to make. And if you decide to meet, this can help you get ready for the future. But for stroke association groups, this is to give you a sense of what is going to be involved in terms of resuming groups as we move forward. So the need and interest, we need to weigh up if there is a need that sort of justifies the risk, essentially, in terms of getting the group back up and running, because that there will be a risk of getting the groups back up and running. That is something that we have to accept. However, what we need to take into consideration is reducing that risk to as low as is reasonably practicable, but also taking into consideration, you know, people's well-being. The fact that we need to provide life after stroke support is sort of one of those double-edged swords. We need to take a calculated risk at some point in the future to help stroke survivors. You also need to consider if volunteers are interested in resuming the group, and you'll need to make sure that you've got obviously enough people to make the group worth running. You know, if you've only got 2 or 3 people, the amount of work that is required to go in to get that group up and running, it may not be proportionate for the effort and the end result at the end. So it's important volunteers don't feel pressurized, but are given the space to make the decision that's right for them, their group, and their clients. If there is enough interest to get the group up, back and running, the key thing that you're going to have to take into consideration is conducting your risk assessment, and they will be your next steps. You will have to have a COVID-19 risk assessment in place. Clubs, as Nick has already mentioned, are welcome to use our template as a starting point moving forward as well. But voluntary groups would need to complete our risk assessment, and we would have to have it signed off by a working panel from us at the Stroke Association to make sure that everything has been put into place. So in doing the risk assessment, you will need to start with your venue. Your venue is obviously the key thing here. They should already have their own risk assessments in place. They should already have lots of control measures in place. If they don't, there's a couple of options here. One of them being potentially to actually go and find a different venue. Also have a conversation with your venue and let them know what their responsibilities are as well. So some of the control measures that will have to be in place is the social distancing, and that is 2 meters apart wherever possible. And we need to take into consideration how people get into the building, how people exit the building. Is there any pinch points around the building? How we go about providing refreshments in a safe manner, using the facilities on site, such as the toilet, and also things like assisting clients. That's something that we've spoken a lot about. And if a client needs assistance, it's really important they only get assistance from people within their bubble or household. And of course, the risk assessment talks you through all of this. For those that have done the normal health and safety risk assessment for groups in the last 12 months or so, you'll have realized there is a new form. It talks you through everything that you need to look at and asks the right questions. And this COVID-19 risk assessment does exactly the same thing. So what I'm saying here might sound a bit daunting, but once you see the form, it literally talks you through everything that you should be doing and checking and asking your venue. You'll also need to consider what activities you can reasonably do within your venue that can be done safely. So, for example, singing at the moment is part of the guidance that singing as an activity should not be done. You also need to consider the hygiene more broadly. Your venue should be taking care of the deep cleans between each use of the facility. But you also need to consider, the cleaning of the venue whilst we're using it, in terms of making sure hand sanitizer is available. And then if you are using any materials such as art materials, making sure, each paintbrush or pencil or whatever is sanitized between people using it. The government's current advice is that people who are over 70 and or otherwise vulnerable should limit their social interaction. And again, we've spoken about this, and it's one of those double-edged sword scenarios. Yes, we want to provide the life after stroke to people. And if that means them coming out and they're over 70, essentially what we're saying here is that we are going to be trusting our clients to do the right thing, with the caveat that we have given them the tools and information to make that decision off their own backs, along with their family members. So we're not going to be putting any sort of age limits on who can attend group from our point of view. You'll also need to comply with the test and trace requirements. So for most clubs and groups, you'll already keep members' information. So it's a case of making sure that this is up to date. It's always important that personal information is up to date, but I think even more so now with regards to the potential of having to sort of, pass these numbers on to the NHS if someone tests positive within the venue, so that everyone else can be contacted to be told to self-isolate or whatever the advice might be. There's a huge variety of measures in place in different localities across all 4 nations. I saw on the news this morning, for example, 2/3 of Wales, I believe, is going to be in lockdown after, I think it's 6 o'clock tonight. So it's important that you stay up to date with the information and guidance to your particular local area. And in some areas, some public health teams from local authorities may actually need to give us permission, or you as the club permission before you can actually meet. You'll also need to think about how and when you ask people. So let me start that again. You need to think about what questions you'll be asking people before they come to group. So this is essentially our screening questions. It's really important that people are made aware of when they should be staying at home and when it could be potentially safe for them to come out. So, for example, if you've had a high temperature or you've got any COVID-19 symptoms, we would obviously expect that individual not to attend group. And that's for everyone, whether that's a client or volunteer. Yeah. Over to you, Nick. Thank you.
Thanks. So just to recap, our stroke association groups will not be meeting until 2021. We'll review that in January and decide if we can start thinking about a date then, or if we need to wait a little bit longer because risk might still be high or guidance might still be changing a lot. For clubs, we absolutely advise you to do the same, but ultimately it is your decision. And when we have the resources complete, we will share them with you to help you along the way, and we'll keep sharing our positions and what we're doing with you to help inform your position. For just now, internally, we're going to work on enabling volunteers to meet. That will be in line with government restrictions and with local guidance. So it might not be possible in all places. So for example, in Scotland, only 2 households can meet. So you wouldn't then be able to bring together volunteers from different households. But this will only be for situations where what you need to achieve can't reasonably be achieved online or by phone. And we're thinking there really about some volunteers who aren't confident using technology, maybe find the phone difficult to use, but it's really important to keep them engaged. So we'll be looking at doing that. But we'll also be doing more to look at how we can help groups connect digitally, because we know some groups have been doing amazing online sessions on Zoom or having WhatsApp groups to keep people connected. So we'll be looking at that some more, and we're working with some really brilliant digital partners who are going to be doing some talks tomorrow where you can get more information about what we're doing there. And also tomorrow, we've got some groups who have been meeting remotely going to share their experiences. So you could join tomorrow to find out a little bit more about that. But we're also going to be focusing on these people who are most isolated. We know that stroke clubs and groups are really, really important social connection for a lot of people, and that some people are really isolated right now. So we're going to be exploring how volunteers can meet members on a one-on-one basis. This can't take place right now because we need to sort of review our guidance and make sure we have appropriate measures in place to keep you safe and to keep members safe. It absolutely won't be a requirement. It will be if you as a volunteer want to. And it's something that will only be done in a really targeted way. So similar to how our staff are doing home visits, except this won't take place inside the home, but it's the same principle of being really targeted and only doing it with group members who want it and who are not able to engage in phone or online support. And with all this work, we'll absolutely share what we're doing with independent clubs so that you can sort of benefit from our resources and hear what we're doing. So that's all we've got to say for just now. Hopefully you've been asking lots of questions in the chat box, and we'll come to them now, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nick. Very complex situation that we're having to manage, all of us locally and nationally. So really appreciate that guidance and the overview of how we're taking things forward. There has been lots of questions coming in, so thank you all for typing and posing these questions to us. Going through our list, I'd like just to bring Anne back for a minute or so to give us a flavour of the questions and discussion that have been going on in the chat bar, Anne.
Yes, we've had some good comments coming in the chat bar, and some support for making the decision not to resume face-to-face meetings until 2021. In terms of questions, there's lots coming in, so thank you, and also thank you for the clarity of the situation and appreciation that the situation is changing, and for addressing this today.
So much, really good to hear. Okay, so with a few questions. So we've had a question from Yvonne of this same theme. Can you please clarify that the 15 max
So I don't know if it's bad for everyone, but I didn't quite hear the question there. I think, Beth, it might be your Wi-Fi if Neil's having the same problem. But I think the question was, does the rule of 15 apply to affiliated clubs? So Neil, do you want to clarify that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been looking at this quite a lot. So the meeting of people up to a maximum of 15 people in England and Northern Ireland, it would apply to affiliated clubs and groups as well. Yes. So hopefully that question answered quite simply.
Yeah, I think so. It's government guidance, not our policy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
is it including volunteers and members?
Sorry, Beth, I didn't get the start of that question.
I think it was, does the rule of 15 include volunteers and members? Yeah, so is it volunteers and members or just members?
Yeah, good question. So it's people. So it would include volunteers and clients. Yeah. Now, I did say there was an exception, and that was solely in Wales. If you are indoors, meeting up to a group of 6, carers can be with that individual who do not count as the 6. So in theory, in Wales only, indoors, you could have 12 people if all 6 people have a carer. But for England and Northern Ireland, it is 15 people. So it might be that you have, 10 clients, 5 volunteers. That's your 15 people.
I think Beth is frozen now. But I can see the questions as well. And we've had a question from Gary at Maidenhead Stroke Club. And Gary has said, would it be a good idea to rotate the volunteers as well as rotating the members? So if you do have to isolate, that doesn't close the club down due to no volunteers. And I think that's a great suggestion. So like Neil was just saying there, it could be your 15 people is 10 members and 5 volunteers. And if you're lucky enough to have, say, 10 volunteers, you could absolutely do 2 half shifts. And then, like you say, if one group had to self-isolate, the other group hasn't been in contact with them. So then the group would be able to keep running for the other 15. So I think that's a brilliant idea. I'm not sure if all clubs and groups would have the number of volunteers needed to do that. But if you could do that, that's a brilliant idea. Our next question. Oh, sorry, Neil, did you have something to add there?
Well, I'm going to back up what you said there, Nick. Yeah, absolutely. That would be good practice, but it wouldn't be something that we would insist as a rule, because I would suggest a lot of groups simply wouldn't have the capacity to do that. But where you do, then absolutely, that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah. Bruce asked if the COVID risk assessment template is available on our website. We've not finished that one off yet, so it's still a work in progress. But absolutely, we will share it when it is finished. we'll let you know by our 2 weekly emails. So clubs and groups, you'll all get an email to your main contacts every 2 weeks, and then we'll let you know via that when it is available.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Just in terms of the risk assessment, it is essentially complete, but with these updated government advice and guidance, it's something that we might need to tweak throughout the process. Something we did a week or two ago is we actually had a number of volunteers feedback into it as well. So we have done a bit of consulting with the process, and the general feedback from it was, very positive, and that the process is quite straightforward.
Hello, hopefully I'm back again. Can you hear me all right?
That's a lot better, Beth. Yeah.
Better. Fingers crossed, we continue. Was that in relation to when the risk assessment will be on the website?
Yeah,
that was another question that's come. Brilliant. And Penny's also asking from Epping Forest. Could you clarify the procedure for affiliate risk assessment and how these are signed off? Would you like to take that?
Yeah. So for affiliated clubs, we will not be signing off the process at Stroke Association. However, what we will be able to do is give you all of the tools to do it locally. So we'll be able to use our form and have access to it. But as an affiliated club, we won't be expecting to see those forms come back into Stroke Association and be authorised. So you will do that locally within your group.
Thank you, Neil. Before we continue, just a hello to Chris Larkin, our Director of Stroke Support in England. Thank you for joining for this quick panel session, Chris, from your perspective, if there's anything around our whole face-to-face recovery. That's great to have you. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, or good afternoon, sorry, I should say, and thank you for the panel.
Brilliant. Just going back to the risk assessment, Lorraine from Nailsea has asked, do we within the Stroke Association to view the COVID risk assessments from our groups? Do you want to talk a little bit how our virtual panel would work, Neil?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going back and reading the question as you dropped out again then, Beth. So yeah, so in terms of do we have the resource to review and sign off all of those risk assessments? It's a good question, fair question. So there are a number of people in a project team that is looking at all of this in terms of getting volunteering back up and face-to-face, which obviously groups is a massive part of that. So we have a number of people there. We obviously have the health, safety and wellbeing team, where there are 2 members of staff. And also we also have a number of health, safety and wellbeing reps across the organisation that I'm currently in the process of encouraging them to get on board. So I believe we will have the resource to sign off those risk assessments. But I think one of the key things there is ensuring that the risk assessment is made easy to sign off. So it's what we don't want to be doing is spending a lot of time looking at the risk assessments and trying to figure out what the information is. So it's really important that the risk assessment is clear and the information is clear, so we can clearly see action required.
And as well,
I think, was there a second part to that question, Beth, that you asked? Sorry, Nick.
No, on you go, Nick.
No. Yeah, and just as a reminder that we'll be taking a phased approach as well. So I mentioned that earlier, that we're going to start with the groups who are least able to connect remotely. And that is part of managing how many happen at once. That, you know, if we have over 220 groups now, if they all sort of started meeting at once, that would be a huge thing for us to support. But by doing it at a sort of phased, slower pace, that makes it a lot more manageable. It means we will be able to support each group as they go through that process.
Yeah. Thank you. A question for Nick, if you can still hear me. Will new membership forms need to be completed when we do resume face-to-face meetings, as a lot has changed since we last met?
Yeah, so you're going to have to go through and check you have up-to-date information for everyone, partly because it's required for GDPR and partly because it's required for track and trace like Neil was talking about there. So you need to at least go through and check that all membership forms are up to date. You might go through it and say, actually, for these 10 people, their information is up to date. There's no point doing a new form. But for these 5 people, actually, their contact details have changed. So then, yeah, you do a new form and you send it in to us if you're a stroke association group. So yeah, you need to check. And if it's not up to date, you'll need to do a new form.
Thank you. And Kathy has asked, what if meeting space has no windows in it? Should it be used? Neil, any advice?
Interesting question. It can still be used if there are no windows in it, with the caveat that all of the other aspects of the risk assessment are adhered to. Space being the building being cleaned, is it COVID secure? It's a good question, but we are not insisting that a venue has windows. I'm assuming it will be to do with opening them and creating ventilation, which I appreciate the question, but no, we wouldn't be insisting that there would be windows. It's not part of the risk assessment. There is much more important things in terms of keeping a building safe than the windows. But it's a good question.
Thank you. Gary has asked, Edenhead, given the restrictions on volunteers for helping members, would it be best to have the first meeting with the more able members to ensure we comply with the hands-off approach required? In terms of a suggestion of when we can meet again, how to start it off? What are your thoughts?
I think that's a really good thing to consider, is think about for your first meeting, how do you make it easy for yourself? So, I was speaking to one volunteer who was thinking about this, and he thought, actually, maybe the first time we'll just have volunteers there, and we'll all meet and we'll go through the process and make sure it all works. And then next time we'll invite maybe 5 members, and next time we'll invite 10 members and build it up slowly over time. So absolutely think about what will make it easy for you so that you can check as you go, because that'll keep people as safe as possible. So yeah, good idea.
Thanks, Nick. We've had a question around PPE, so around masks. Are masks needed? And what about those people where we're supporting who have aphasia, so around communication? What are your thoughts around masks, Neil, and how that sits with the general risk assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it does form part of the risk assessment, and it will be something that we will be strongly encouraging people to wear PPE, face masks, wherever possible. However, there are some caveats as to where people can't wear face masks for medical reasons. So yeah, essentially, again, it would have to be picked up on your risk assessment. But in summary, we are not going to be insisting people wear face masks, with the caveat that I double check the government advice based on it. It's changing all of the time. So yeah, where people have aphasia, and essentially, I think the guidance says something along the lines of any long-term medical issue that would affect their ability to breathe safely. And if we are seeing stroke as that long-term illness that would prevent people from wearing masks, then we could have a lot of groups where people aren't wearing masks. But it is something we would encourage, particularly with the volunteers who might be moving around in group a bit more than the clients.
Thank you.
Is it worth just saying briefly, but certainly, our staff obviously is a different thing, and our coordinators across England, they are all wearing masks as mandatory, and we have been able to secure clear face masks for them when they're working with people with a communication disability. So we do know that can make a difference, particularly where people have aphasia, and can be really beneficial to be able to still see someone's mouth. And our IT team, I don't know where this is up to, apologies, but we might be able to share information about it. Simon Evans in our RT team, there's been some great videos online of paramedics using Google Translate and things like that, or Google Apps to show as they're speaking the words on their phone or on a tablet. And we have been looking into some of those as a potential way to again, support people with aphasia when we're working with them. So it might be that some of those things would be suitable for some of our groups as well.
Thank you. Absolutely. Building on what we're doing already and what we're learning through the rest of our face-to-face support. We've had a question around what if people meet as friends? So we're very aware that within groups, you have networks of friends. And often these people before COVID were meeting as friends outside of the group as well. So it's a valid question. I think we could all probably give a little answer on this. Maybe, yeah. Do you want to start, Nick, in terms of what we're thinking around friendship groups? But do pop in, Neil and Chris, if you have reflections.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different if we're talking about volunteers or if we're talking about members. What members choose to do in their own time is ultimately their decision. And if they choose to meet up as friends, that's up to them. We can't control that. With volunteers, we think it's important that you have clear boundaries with people. So we'd be saying to volunteers that you shouldn't really be meeting up with members if that sort of blurs the boundaries, because we're working on putting measures in place for people to meet one-on-one where there's a real need for it and where it will reduce isolation. But we're not there yet, so we need a little bit of time to make sure we can advise you how to do that more safely.
Thank you. Have you anyone else on the panel, Neil or Chris, have you got any reflections around that? I think that sums it up for us.
I think Nick's captured it really.
Other than just echo what.
Yeah. Thank you. We've got a question from Angela, who is the organizer of an independent affiliated club. Is our public liability insurance invalidated if we do not follow the Stroke Association guidelines? Really good question. I can come in does anybody else want to take that?
I don't mind.
Yeah, go.
Okay.
Yeah, our guidance doesn't have any legal bearing, so I can't imagine it would invalidate your public liability insurance. But talk to your insurance provider. Gallagher's is the company that provides the discounted deal that we offer to independent clubs. They've shared some information with us. If in doubt about anything about your insurance, talk to your insurance provider. But our guidance shouldn't have bearing on that. But our guidance does reflect the law. So, the things that we have in our risk assessment, you will need to have considered them if it's part of the law. I'm not sure if anyone wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'd just reiterate, speak to your insurance provider. And I know Gallagher are the organisation that you can get reduced insurance through from our affiliation scheme. We're working very closely with. So in our e-balance that we send every fortnight, but if you need that again, we can get that fact sheet from them to you. If you don't affiliate to Gallagher, it might be an interesting FAQ for you to see from an insurance provider, but yeah, absolutely contact your insurance. Fabulous. Okay, we've had quite a few questions coming through around Christmas meals, as we thought we would, because we're in the run-up to Christmas and we know that many groups and clubs use this time to come together and celebrate. So James has asked the question, as a few others, can we arrange Christmas dinners in a local hotel or in a restaurant? He's particularly asking it around Northern Ireland. So you're obviously based over there. Welcome. I don't think we've had many groups from Northern Ireland attend our face-to-face event, so it's great to have you here. What are your thoughts on Christmas dinners and our position on that, Neil?
Yeah, so this is something we have had a conversation about, and it looks like I'm the one here to sort of deliver this message really in the bad news, if you like, but we would not be welcoming Christmas dinners to be organised under Stroke Association's umbrella, so i.e. meeting as your group. Does that, Nick and Chris, does that summarise?
I think ultimately that there's not less risk just because it's a Christmas meal, the actual risk could become higher and higher over winter.
Mhm.
So you have to bear in mind that the risk is the same. But I guess
Yeah.
what you could do is tell your members that you will have a meal when sort of the world is a bit back to normal. And obviously we don't know when that'll be, but you could make that commitment to them that you will do it when it's safe to do so, even if that does mean it's in many months' time.
Yeah, sadly, I mean, nobody wants to be giving that sort of message today, but I think absolutely, you know, we have to go with what we think is right and what is going to keep people safe. And at this moment in time, we just don't think it would be safe for us to say that it's okay to organise Christmas meals. Unfortunately, you know, we wish it was different, and you know, many of us will be looking at the guidelines about whether we can even get together with our extended families and things like that at Christmas, because of the rules that have been discussed previously. So yeah, very, very sad to say that this year we think we will have to say no to Christmas meals.
Yeah, and just to add that, of course, you know, if we were to say yes to Christmas meals, then people don't want to do it and say, well, I'd rather meet in a cafe, or I don't celebrate Christmas. It could potentially create a snowball effect. So, you know, our position is sort of a no on that, with obviously everyone's safety to the forefront of our minds making that decision.
Thank you all. And I think just to build on that in terms of how we do continue to connect, maybe not physically, but let's think, and please do come along to the session tomorrow, which is at 11:30, around how we can connect remotely and learn from each other. We know it's challenging, and we know there are lots of barriers around that, but we're doing a big research project with a digital agency called Reason Digital, who have been interviewing lots of our clubs and groups, volunteers and members, to see how we can support you more with online support. So while we can't be together face to face, I think it's about what can we do to celebrate that time with your group, if that is an important time to connect together in some way. We've had a question from Michelle, good question about the new membership, well, the membership forms when people do meet face to face. Will they be different? Will they require any information regarding COVID-19? I think that's, yeah, a really good point. I'll go to Nick and Neil on that, and I can jump in as well. I think we will need to consider specific questions from the risk assessment into the membership form, don't we, Neil, if we need to, or if everything can be held within the risk assessment, as long as the key bits of information are held somewhere. Would you agree?
Scott, after you, Nick, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just now, we're hoping that we don't necessarily have to update all membership forms. So we're hoping that there's, you know, sufficient information there for track and trace purposes, that you can use your existing registers, so that you keep a lot of the stuff that you're familiar with and you have already to meet the needs. But there will be sort of, we've got a toolkit, and sort of on there, it will be sort of making sure you've asked the questions about COVID, and you can keep track of it on that document without having to update the membership forms.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
and a question again from Lorraine. Thank you for your questions. They're all coming through thick and fast. Just back on the face masks. So will we be providing masks to volunteers from Stroke Association voluntary groups? Yeah, in terms of providing that equipment, Neil. Yeah.
Yeah, short answer, yes. Where we identify the need for PPE, we have to provide it. So nobody can go out of pocket buying personal protective equipment. Sorry, I know there was a slight lag on the call there. I didn't want to talk to you there.
And yeah, just a question around when we will see the risk assessment and the guidance and the toolkit in terms of our timings of getting those out to people. Nick?
Yep. So we've got really good drafts of them.
Yep,
they're really not far off. Yeah, they're not far off at all now. But like Neil was saying, the government guidance was updated last week, and we have 4 different countries in the UK with 4 different governments setting, you know, different guidance. So we have to go through that really carefully and make sure that everything is still correct. So we're looking probably a couple of week times. We've not finalised and set exact timescales yet, because this has all changed so quickly that it's been sort of literally last week. We're still pinning down what exactly it means. So we're looking to do some very small scale trials. We'll have it prepared for them, but then it might need updated again by the time groups more widely are able to resume in 2021. So we'll have a draft for the trials.
Definitely. Thank you. And if there's
Yeah,
anyone...
absolutely. The key thing there, Nick, is sorry, you keep talking at the same time. Sorry, Beth. There's a delay on the call. Yeah, I was just going to sort of re-emphasize the point that Nick said, that it's we're going to be running a number of risk assessments for pilot groups, and there will probably be a few tweaks and changes off the back of that. So with the fact that we're not running groups on the whole until next year, I don't think there's necessarily a massive rush for everyone to have access to it, but just those people who are doing the pilot to start with.
Thank you. For anyone that wants to join our group, our recovery group, to help craft and look at risk assessments in a more detailed way to feed in, we're always open for more people to join that. Just let us know in the chat box if you're keen. And last question, are face visors okay to use? This is a question from Alan. Neil.
Yeah, this is a question we have been asked quite a lot, and it's a completely fair question, because I've seen lots of people wearing them. When I get my hair cut, they're wearing face visors. However, our organisational position is that if face masks are mandatory, and I'll be using the example of our coordinators going in to do home visits, where the face masks are mandatory, which obviously covers the mouth and nose. If you were only wearing a face visor, which obviously, you have a strap around the head and it covers the face, the airborne particles still have, a bigger chance of getting between the visor and the nose and mouth and being, breathed in. So where PPE is mandatory, or face masks, a face visor is not a suitable alternative. But let's not forget, a group environment is going to be, it's going to be just that. It's going to be a different environment, and it's probably something we need to have a bit more conversation around as to whether face visors would be okay, because I've already said that PPE will not be necessarily mandatory for everyone to wear in the group environments.
Thank you. I think that was the last question that's come through for us. Is there any final reflections from we work to close the session and talk about the next one that's coming at 2 o'clock? Chris, anything from you from a wider stroke support recovery, or do you think we've covered it all?
I mean, I think you've obviously given people a lot to think about. All I would say is this, thanks for bearing with us. We're all dealing with something that we've never dealt with before. Our priority is keeping you, and our associated team of volunteers safe, and the people that we're here to support safe. And every decision we make is with that in mind, whilst also wanting to make sure that we're here to support people, because we know how vital the groups are for support. And striking that balance between safety and support is kind of critical to what we're. So just keep in touch, keep asking the questions you've been asking, because they've been fantastic questions and that I've seen in the comments, really common sense stuff, and we'll continue to work with you to make sense of this as much as we can. Just thank you everybody that's out there for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. Nick and Neil, any last reflections from any of the comments before I bring Anne back in to summarise how it's been going for the community on the chat bar?
I mean, just to echo what Chris said, really, this is all brand new to all of us. And I mean, by the sounds of it, everyone's being, really patient with us, because it is all brand new, and the government and their advice continually changing. There's a lot of work to stay on top of that. But we will obviously endeavour to do our best to do that. So yeah, thanks for sort of sticking by us, really.
Thanks, Neil. Welcome back, Anne.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to everyone in the chat box who's been so engaged. We've had lots of questions come in, so thank you for that. If anybody does have any further questions, then please do post them either in the chat box, and we'll pick those up after the session, or email them to clubconference@stroke.org.uk. There's lots of positive comments coming in and appreciating Nick, Neil, Chris, and yourself, Beth, for addressing these difficult issues and for answering as many questions as possible. And there's also lots of sharing on there of people's own experiences of risk assessments for their own venues and transport providers and their insurance companies, and also sharing of some details about different apps and things that people might be able to apply and use for their own members if they're not connecting in their groups.
Wonderful. Wow. Sounds like there's a huge amount of support going. So much to give that summary to us of the screen. Thank you. So we're coming. Thank you all so much for a different format. We really do appreciate it. Before you take a break from your screen, grab your lunch, can I give a quick reminder about the session that is happening at 2 o'clock? Very different. You're going to hear from Catherine Charles, who is a mindfulness practitioner, and she's been running mindfulness in some groups in Wales to help. Also, it helps with her own stroke recovery. And you'll get to have a taster of this type of mindfulness to help you relax. So do come along to learn more about how to look after your well-being and the well-being of the people you support in your group. And we will see you hopefully at 2 o'clock. Thank you so much.